Sure. We're so happy to talk with you. This is Character Day. This is our third session for the Google Hangout. Anyone that's listening, tuning in, ask your questions through the hashtag Character Day on Twitter or Facebook or through the Google Hangout, and we'll incorporate your questions. And actually, do you want to read the top of the bio here?
Yeah. So I'm just going to read a little bit about Matthew, who we are speaking to now. Matthew Albert is an acclaimed human rights lawyer specializing in refugee law in Australia. In 2000, at the age of 19, he co-founded the Sudanese Australian Integrated Learning (open bracket SAIL, close bracket) program, a volunteer secular organization that provides English language support and community services to the Sudanese refugee community in 3 Australian cities and 1 in Germany.
Hang on a second. And officially, your main title is that you are a human rights lawyer, which we're really excited to get into character and human rights. But to start, and you're also an author and a photographer, which hopefully you'll integrate that into your answers. We can learn more about that.
Sure.
So why do you think there's been such a resurgence in interest around character all over the world right now?
I think it's probably a reflection of the fact that there's been so much focus on technical skills for a long time and so much focus on vocational skills. And those skills tend to be ones that are more about the head than the heart. And actually what's needed more and more, particularly with creative solutions to long-lasting problems, is for people to be using their heart more than their head, or maybe using their heart with their head a whole lot more. And that's where character, I think, takes center stage. And it's important, increasingly important in my mind, that be part of what people are thinking about, particularly when they're thinking about their kind of long-term future and career goals, whether it be a 10-year-old thinking about that or a 40-year-old thinking about that.
I love that, the head and the heart. We actually tried to work that graphic into the adaptable mind, and then we went really abstract instead. But for the head, heart, and hand, like for so long it was about the hand, an agricultural economy. This is about the head, the heart, and it's like, how do you make them all work together? And I think that is what is happening right now, which is what is very exciting and why we wanted to have this conversation also.
Yeah, and we know that you've won a lot of awards. I know you're very modest, so you wouldn't want to say it yourself, but you've had so much public recognition, and I was wondering, did you push for this? How important is this for your own self-worth and also for public awareness?
I didn't wish for it or do anything for it, really. I mean, I think to my mind, to the extent there have been awards or anything like that, it's a recognition of a huge team of people's work. So the organization that I started is exclusively volunteer. It's volunteer run, it's volunteer involved all the way through. And so that means there's literally hundreds of people who are donating their time, people way more skilled and way more experienced than me. And so the award, to my mind, they're really just a reflection of that whole team's effort. I mean, it's certainly not something I seek, but I guess the key point is I've done it and I do it still because I love it. And there's a big part of me that finds it kind of strange that there's been any accolades at all, or that it's noticed, because actually, I mean, people look at it, I think, fairly often, or people say that, it's really selfless and you're doing all these things for other people. And actually, honestly, it's not. It's really very selfish. It's selfish because I get a lot from it. I get to meet amazing people. I get a lot of feeling of fulfillment from doing the work and being involved in people's lives in the way that we are. But I get a huge amount of self-satisfaction from seeing other people's lives be a little bit easier because of the work that we try and help them with. So actually, as I say, it kind of gets packaged as if it's a selfless thing, and to my mind, it's pretty selfish.
Well, obviously human rights and character. I mean, there's so much news today about all the refugees, and there's actually quite a few in the Twitter stream asking about human rights and character. I mean, we're seeing so many images of people trying to get into safety and asylum. And what are your thoughts about character and human rights?
Well, I mean, for this huge group of people that are on the move at the moment, and there are really millions and millions, not just from Syria, character is right at the center of what it is that they're doing. They're showing unbelievable resilience against very, very trying circumstances. They've got to have an amazing character to overcome all of the physical and psychological and financial and material barriers that are being put up in front of them. So to my mind, these people are, exercising their basic human rights that we've recognized since the end of World War II, when it all became very clear to all of us what human rights needed to be protected. They're pursuing those rights in a very real, practical way, but they're having to do it with their own kind of inner fortitude and strength and character to make sure that they and their families are safe. So I think the interaction between those two things is really very strong. At the heart of character, at the heart of human rights, is the human condition and the human experience. And part of that condition and experience is trying to get the basics in place, the most fundamental of all of those being safety and dignity. And that's what these people are really pursuing.
There's a question. Do you want to read this one here?
Yeah, actually, in regards to that, we have a question from Twitter which says, do you see evidence of universal advances in compassion in Australia with the Aboriginal people? Are there useful lessons as millions migrate due to climate change from now south to north?
Look, Australia's got a long way to go with Indigenous affairs. I think we've had a very long journey trying to better understand the two communities, the original community, the Aboriginal people who've been here for tens of thousands of years, and those who have recently arrived, myself included, who really only started arriving 200 odd years ago. I think the lessons that can be learnt are kind of stripping back to basics. It goes back to, if you want to go to religious texts, to the golden rule, so-called, that thread that runs through all the world's religions that says basically put yourself in someone else's shoes and look from their perspective to try and work out what's going to be best to help them. That's at the center of human rights. It's at the center of character. It's also at the center of the discussion in Australia about Indigenous affairs. I tend to think it's also right at the center of the refugee crisis globally that's happening, particularly in Europe at the moment, but has been going on for a long time.
Well, when you said that, I mean, what you said was really empathy, which we go into in the film, The Golden Rule, which you never really hear that connection, but that is what that is all about. And thinking about ways to empathize more. How do you build empathy? And we go into that. You saw The Adaptable Mind, and we explored just very simple things you can do to build your sense of empathy, which is like a muscle. You can gain more empathy if you focus on it. Do you have thoughts about that? I mean, you're working every day with refugees, and do you think about that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot. Like at the original impetus for doing refugee work is that my grandfather came to Australia as a refugee in World War II. My family's Jewish. He came on a boat to this country. He arrived when he was 19. He had high school education, but nothing more. He knew one family, but not very well here. And that family showed incredible empathy to him, took him under their wing, set him up with a job, helped him out getting settled here. And the amazing thing about my grandfather, and it's a source of great pride for me, is that he then went on to make a huge contribution to this country in setting up a broadcaster, for example, for ethnic communities, in being a very vocal critic of particular policies, but also a person who built Australian multiculturalism. As I say, that's a source of immense pride for me, but it's also a source of inspiration in that it's a very direct way that I can kind of bring empathy into the equation. To my mind, what the SAIL program is doing is providing to a new generation of migrants, a new generation of refugees, precisely the same hand up that my grandfather got 70, 80 years ago, to allow them to be contributors to Australia and to the world in the same way that he was. So it is, at the heart of it, the motivation is I guess, empathetic.
It seems like people are so desensitized. I mean, the photograph a photograph can bring, inspire so much action. But what are the ways in your work that you try to really have people feel more empathy?
I think telling individual stories is really powerful, and it's one of the things that I really enjoyed about the films that you've put out for today, was telling individual stories, because I think numbers are pretty numbing, and crises are happening on such large scales that it's really hard to grapple with. Even the most empathetic person is going to run out of empathy when they're faced with, millions figures or even thousands figures. And yet that's the way the media packages it up so often. What was really amazing to me just in the last few weeks was that photo that I think we've probably all seen of that police officer or whoever he is carrying the lifeless body of that young boy. And all of a sudden there's a new entry point to a very human crisis. And when you get that entry point and it is so human, all of a sudden you're engaging with the issues on a different level.
So do you think it's easier to empathize with one person as a human rather than with the masses? And why? Why do you feel like that?
Oh, I wish I knew the answer to why. I don't know, but I do think on a base psychology, like pop psychology level, it is easier to see yourself and to see your own life experience in one other person's life experience than it is to see it in a whole group of people. What's amazing in this country, and we've had real issues around the approach to refugees, is that where people are, for example, not at all empathetic, but they meet a refugee or know a refugee from their day-to-day life, the very strange but very common reaction is, well, I don't like refugees and refugees are a problem. But this person I know who's a refugee, well, they're the exception to the rule. They're a good person and we should keep them. But the other ones, they're bad because the media tells me they're bad. And there you see a very real example of the, to my mind, slightly strange psychology of not being able to empathize with the group because they're amorphous and they're faceless, but being able to empathize very easily with the individual who they know. And I think that's a powerful lesson for those of us who are trying to advocate in this area, that those individual stories have greater cut through.
Yeah, that is definitely a draw in filmmaking, is that you can tell that story that can have people identify. And so much in media, when there's TV shows that share stories and perspectives you haven't heard, suddenly people can understand the perspective. It's so important in so many issues. And I think, do you think in Australia, just compared to other countries, what's been really interesting to us is just that it seems to be the character conversation it seems to be in all parts of the world right now. And that's such a fascinating, we were looking at character used to be so enmeshed in religion. And then at least in America, there was a separation between church and state. And then it was all kind of, and now it's coming back. It's very hot in America to talk about character and education. And I'm just wondering, is it like that in Australia? Is there a resurgence of that conversation?
Yeah, I think there is. At the end of the day, the term character, to my mind, is a bit of a proxy for almost like a soul searching. And I think there is a collective soul searching happening here at schools, but also in workplaces. And I think, it's anecdotal only, but one thing I've noticed in Melbourne just over the last year, it's really recent, is that there's been a flourishing of mentoring programs, which I think is fascinating. Yeah. Because all of a sudden there's this focus on a one-to-one connection where you've got two people, one with more experience in an area than the other, who are being facilitated to come together and talk about those character issues fundamentally. And that's being promoted more and more as a means to have a fuller person and a more fulfilling life. So I think it is emerging here as well. The way it's manifesting may be slightly different, but it is emerging as a real thing. Again, going back to that point of not just needing technical skills anymore. It's great if you can be, the great engineer that solves the next problem, but if you can't work with people to help them solve the problem, or you can't interact with them to work out what their issues are to solve with all your skills, well, what's the value of your skills? So that focus, I think, is a really healthy thing. But our experience, or my experience here on the other side of the planet, is similar to yours.
There's someone, Dara Feldman, who's wonderful. She's from the Virtues Project, and she just wrote on Twitter, "Empathy, we are hardwired for it. However, if you don't use it, you can lose it." Which I do think it is something that, if you we put in the film, like, just taking that extra moment to know the names of people you're talking to all the time, but you might not know their backstory, where they are, and spend that extra moment to really listen and think about where they might be coming from. And I mean, it's one extra step in all of these situations. It's such a good way to build that in yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's an interesting thing to be said about, there's always talk about how connected we are now with social networking and all. I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation, right? It's unbelievable that this is possible, and we've not met, but here we are having a great conversation. And there's that connectedness, and yet at the same time, there's a disconnectedness. Perhaps because we're so connected, we kind of lost sight of those individual relationships that we need to have a fulfilling, meaningful life and to be happy. I mean, there was I don't know if you remember a few years ago when Facebook was really coming on the scene, there was some academic papers done that said, and this was a revelation apparently, that regardless of how many Facebook friends you had, there was no sign that anyone had more friendships or more meaningful friendships than before Facebook or social networking existed. Now that almost seems like a non-revelation, but the fact that we're even asking that question tends to suggest that we've kind of lost sight of some of the fundamentals about human interaction that make us feel fulfilled.
I mean, on Twitter, it's funny. Sometimes I'm on Twitter a lot. But sometimes I'm on and I'm communicating. And here's the thing, of course, I have made meaningful connections over Twitter. They're different.
Sure.
Of course, they don't replace my real life best friends and all of that. But it is funny how, there's just all these kind of different levels of connections, but nothing replaces the in-person. I think everyone knows that. Human evolution requires that we have eye contact, that we are connecting and we're growing. Oh, we have a couple more minutes. And I keep saying, as I'm trying to look you straight in the eye, this is my big thing, is I want that thing where we can look at each other straight in the eye in this Google Hangout, which it's tricky too, right? You're looking at the camera, you're looking at yourself. It's always funny when you're talking to Skype with people because they're not sure where to look, and then they're checking out themselves at some point, and then they're like, oh, I should look at the camera. And then they're like, oh, it's so funny. Or I've forgotten that I was on Skype, and that's not good ever.
I'm trying harder now too.
Oh, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly hear about your photography and how you think that you can connect people or empathize with someone through that, and what your subject matter related around.
Yeah, so I had a photography exhibition a few years ago, and it was just after I'd returned from working for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Kenya and went briefly into South Sudan. And the purpose of the exhibition was to tell the story of flight from South Sudan through refugee camps in Kenya, where I was working, through to Australia, and to make that story accessible through images to an Australian audience, really with a view to building empathy so that people could understand where South Sudanese people had come from in a narrative sense before they arrived in Australia. And the purpose of it really was, again, to just make it accessible, to show individuals and to give a little bit of their individual story so that people could understand a lot better. I think it goes in a way back right where we were before, that people could interact with an image and see themselves, or just see a normal looking person on the other side of the the frame, and see in that person some of themselves, or at least something of their humanity, so that when they then ideally saw a person of the same background walking down the street in Australia, they'd have a little bit of a sense of how they ended up here, what they'd gone through before they arrived here. So it's just, in a way, trying to package up the same backstory so that more people could access it, and could access it in a different format.
Well, listen, that's a perfect way to end. We will link to your work when we link to your bio, so people can check it out. And thank you so much. We loved talking to you, and to starting the character conversation. And I guess it's have a good day. You're in the middle of
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be part of it, and good luck for the rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.